So today we're going to cover what we mean by discovery. So what is it? Some elements of a discovery phase, and then some pointers, by which I mean like some tips that we've picked up over the years of doing discovery phases. So first of all, what do we mean by discovery? Well, discovery is quite a broad word and is used in the industry quite to cover quite a lot of different circumstances. When we first started Agile Collective, so almost 15 years ago now, we always had a discovery phase or a discovery sprint at the start of a project, but we were using much more agile methodology at the time. And so it was a very, very quick process of just trying to identify all of the user needs and then immediately launching into dealing with the first one that was considered to be the biggest priority. This had some advantages and can be used on very large projects with many, many sprints. But most of the projects we work on are not like that. They are limited to maybe 4 sprints or 5 sprints. And if you limit your discovery to that kind of just needs gathering, you will end up basically hitting a budget buffer halfway down the project. So about 8 or 9 years ago, we started bringing in more elements of design thinking. So deliberate user empathy and planning at the start of each project. So what is it? In my mind, and the way that we talk about it in Agile Collective now, discovery only really describes the learning phase. It doesn't describe any of the design that follows on. So it's important in our minds to make sure that discovery is a phase in which we're constantly learning more things. You're learning about your organization, you're learning about your audiences and what the priorities should be. And it's important that you do this before you you may have a solution in mind, but it's important that you do this before you actually settle on the solution. And the reason for this is because we ourselves as humans, whether we're clients or not, often enter into a project thinking that we understand exactly what the solution needs to be. And that's based on a number of different assumptions that we're not very good at questioning. It's just the human way. We are victims of wishful thinking in terms of budget and also in terms of the effectiveness of a solution. And we're also bad at assessing risks. So, and we know this, projects always have complexities in them, but we tend to, if we don't plan properly for that, then we will end up in trouble. And then perhaps the most compelling case to selling a discovery phase to stakeholders is that it will save money. By clarifying your direction of travel at the start, you will end up basically doing fewer things in the future and less expensive things, and probably more effective things at the same time. Just a couple of recent examples. We do discovery phases on everything now. This is a project for the University of Oxford. It came to us last year, and the vision that the project team had initially was of a 3D fly-through, so a 3D visualization of the tomb of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. Now, this is desirable. It's a desirable outcome in the long run, but when we were engaged, we undertook research and a discovery phase. We talked to users and we discovered that, in common with a lot of digital humanities projects actually that are intended to have impact in the world, the visualizations were not as important as actually having a good database for the primary users. And then actually a much cheaper way of creating impact was through storytelling. So you can see that on the right there, the finished product in the end ended up with a number of different stories in which we took out elements of the database and said, can we write stories about these database items? And the engagement is obviously much greater, and it's a lot cheaper than building the 3D fly-through. And it's also building the case for the full 3D fly-through, which we're hoping to raise sufficient funds for later this year. War on Want is a client that we've been working with for many years now, excellent campaigning charity. But last year they came to us with an idea that came from internal editors and people who are producing content for their audiences, that the site wasn't quite working for them, and it was the site format, it was the way that the articles were being presented that meant that they weren't having as much impact as had been hoped. So we did some instead of just saying, okay, great, in that case, let's make the changes, let's promote the articles to the homepage, let's reformat the articles so that they can be longer and have more content in them. Instead, what we did is we said, actually, we're not sure about that. Let's ask the users. Let's look at the analytics. Let's go through and find out exactly what is going on here. And what we discovered was actually quite surprising, which was that the target audience for the articles wasn't coming to the website at all. It was engaged members, and they were being contacted through newsletters and through social media, but they were being taken to a different website, which is the campaigning website, and that's where that audience went. So it was no wonder that those articles weren't engaging with the audience that they expected. Instead, we found that the website actually had quite a large number of international visitors that we called explorers, and we decided to help them refactor the website to do more in capturing those explorers and turning them into supporters in the long run. So in both cases, we started off with an idea, but it was only through doing the discovery phase that we actually put our finger and got the evidence to decide exactly what the real problem was. So it's about reframing problems. And as a client said to me just the other week, we always learn something when we do a discovery phase. As much as you think you know, doing a discovery phase will always reveal more. Okay, I'm just going to, because I'm going to be doing a lot more talking, here's another moment of interactivity. So imagine you've been sent this brief. This brief says, we want to redesign our website. Our bounce rate is high, so that's people leaving the site without engaging, and we're not getting enough signups. We'd like a modern look and better navigation. Can you think, if you were the agency on this side, what's the one question you would want answering before you started work? What is the question that you might ask? I'm asking you this because I just want to get you thinking through this process before I say how we do it. No right or wrong audiences. Who are your audiences? What's the budget? Yes, with an exclamation mark, not even a question. Absolutely. You've jumped to a solution. Correct, yes. Exactly. So their solution there is a modern look and better navigation. What discovery has already been done? So yeah, what evidence have we got? What have you done up till now? Anything else? Okay, well, those are all excellent questions. Has it always been like this? That's a good question. Yeah, are you trying to fix something that is unfixable? What they call in design thinking a gravity problem. Or like I was saying with War on Want, maybe your frame is too narrow. The website can only do so many things, and your website should be part of a much wider strategy, as I will talk about in a second. Okay, great. So what are the elements of a discovery phase? Well, there are many different ways of doing it, but this is the way that we do it. In my mind, there are 3 areas to explore and then 1 moment of decision. So the 3 areas to explore are, I've already touched on them before, what does the organization want? So the website belongs to an organization or a campaign or to some other institution. What are the overall strategic aims? Then secondly, who are you talking to? Who is your audience and what do they need? And then finally, if it's already something that's in existence, what is working well, what isn't working well? So an audit on the existing functionality. So that's gathering more information. And then you need to define the challenge. So it's an element of gathering information and then deciding what to do on the basis of it. So I'm going to go through each of these now, A to D. And for each of these, I've said what we do in terms of typical activities at the bottom, but I'm not going to go into detail. There's just too much information to say exactly how we do some of these things. And instead, I was thinking, well, this could be another webinar. Each of these different things could be how we run these processes. But in order to help you think about this, it's important for you to, I think, leave with like a simple understanding of what discovery is, so that when you're in a discovery phase or when you're planning a discovery phase, you're able to say, actually, are we asking the right questions? And that's what this consists of, quite a lot of questions. So what does the organization want? We think we know what the organization wants, but we work with a lot. And actually, in terms of how they interpret their mission and vision, there's a lot of ambiguity even within an organization. So I call this a usefully naive question. And it's worth going right back to the top. What is your mission? What's your current strategy? And by strategy here, I mean, what is your 10-year strategy for achieving your mission? But also, what is your current communication strategy, if you have one? And then if we're talking about a project, then what is the vision and the idea behind the project? What is the prime motivation of the project? Do we have a good enough understanding of this project? And related to that, how will you know that we have succeeded? And is there buy-in across the organization or amongst the relevant stakeholders? So there are a range of activities, as I said, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about these, but I will just highlight two things here. The first is just to remind ourselves that the website sits within and serves other parts of the organization. Nobody really needs a website or a campaign or a product for its own sake. And here we're talking about the kinds of products or kinds of websites that are designed to engage other people. They sit within a network that is pre-existing, all of which comes from your mission and strategy, which then leads on to your identity, to your comms and your content, and to the services that you deliver. How you share that content, how you deliver those services, will vary, but it won't just be the website. The website will be part of a wider strategy. And then on top of that, we've got user needs. So it's about building empathy with the people who are actually going to be using it. And the website is not like a building. It's not like a monolith that you want to create in order to show off. It's actually something that is designed to help people complete journeys. So as a result, you can see that we got the letters KPIs here at various different levels. This is so that when we're doing the discovery phase, we remember to put the key performance indicators, so the metrics of success, are not related just to the website itself. They're related to the context in which the website exists. So, for example, we might put on the content a key performance indicator, which is like how many people is this reaching? Do people understand it? And again, that may well be in terms of like page clicks on the website, but it may not be. It may be that you're sharing it more effectively via social media, and the click-throughs to the website are secondary for your audience. So it can be tempting to say, well, all we need is more, we need bigger, but you may well not be answering your fundamental goals if you do that. And then there is one tactic, one activity that I'm going to call out here, and today I'm calling it a success session, which is a lot of S's in it, but it's something that we sometimes call a theory of change workshop. But it is one of the most important and lightweight things that we've developed, which is gathering your stakeholders together and asking them very simply, how will you know that we have succeeded? And I say at the bottom, you can use this for a project, for a website, for a campaign, for an initiative, for an idea, for a whole organization. We've run this at various different levels. It is incredibly revealing and incredibly useful to get a variety of different inputs and opinions on how the people who hold different roles in an organization understand success. We often find that there's a lot of overlap, but then there's some difference of opinions. But we find that this is one of the most effective ways of not talking about solutions, but actually talking about the outcome that you want to achieve. By focusing on the outcome, it allows you to actually identify those metrics at a higher level, those key performance indicators. This workshop can happen in 2 hours and with some work afterwards to group the findings and to play them back to people. But just asking people, I sometimes just say, you've got 4 minutes, just write down as many definitions of success as you can, is an incredibly good way of getting people to change their discussion from, we really need a carousel or a map on the homepage, that's what we need, and changing that from, actually what we really need is for users to be able to find their local pharmacy or whatever the objective is. Okay, so that's about the organization, understanding your organizational needs, the strategies that it lives within. Audiences or users, in the case of digital products, who are they? Who are you talking to? What are their primary goals? And indeed, who are your primary audiences and who are your secondary audiences? What are their needs and what are their challenges? So goals are the thing that they're trying to achieve. Needs might well be the things that are required for them to achieve those goals. And challenges might well be to do with understanding. It might be to do with inability to find. It might be to do with things that are not to do with the website at all. It might be the language that it's written in, for example. How and when do they engage with you? So this gets us to build a little bit of empathy and think about, are they looking on their phone? Are they stressed? Are they incapacitated in some way or another? At what point in their journey? So again, this is putting their website journey within a much wider journey. Have they just left the doctors? Are they trying to find the location of your event? In which case, they might well be they may well be distracted and interrupted. And the context in which they're operating here is one also of like, well, have they heard of you? What other influences are there on their lives? C is review and auditing of what currently exists. So this is typical where we might take on a website, for example, that already exists. But you could also think about this in terms of a campaign, for example. How well is the campaign working? And there's just a number of questions that just break down this. How well is it working? How well does what we already have meet our and our users' needs? So triangulating against the two objectives we mentioned before. Are there any gaps that we're not meeting? Are we doing anything that gets in the way of our users' aims? So one of the problems that we face quite often, because we're creating digital products where content is added and added and added, and there is pressure to create more complexity in terms of visual design, is that we might well be getting in the way of our users completing their journey by trying to push more and more things on them. So you'll see this very typically on home pages. And then, is everything we're doing in support of our broader aims? So one of the things that you can do during a discovery phase is to identify areas where you don't need to be doing as much as you are already. This is perhaps less of a problem now, but in the 5 to 10 years ago, there were quite a lot of news articles that were just being put on blog posts and other things that were being added to websites that weren't actually getting much traction at all, but which were taking editors quite a lot of time to write. And so one of the things we would suggest to people is like, well, if this content is really valuable, then you might turn it into evergreen content, explainers, rather than thinking just about creating more and more news items that are not being impactful, or even worse, in terms of your opportunity cost, is having content that performs very well, but not with the right audience. We often think about high value and low value traffic. You might have a news item from 2010 that actually still gets quite a lot of hits, but the information is out of date and it's being used by, or it's being served to people just because it's hitting a Google algorithm, but they're not really actually your target users. So that kind of metric saying, well, this is great, we're getting, 50,000 views a month to this web page, that means we're doing well. That's a very bad metric. If actually those 50,000 visits are kind of frivolous or not related to your ultimate mission and goal. And then, are we delighting our users? This is a sort of more personal one, but yeah, rather than trying to wow them into submission, actually delighting them, creating a nice experience is something that we constantly think of as being our aim, because that means they're more likely to come back and find us useful again. So the way we do this is through audits, through user testing, through looking at the analytics and so on. So defining the challenge. Once you've gathered all of this information, and I'll say a little bit more about scale of the discovery phase in a minute, you then need to bring it all together and then make some decisions. And this can be quite a hard bit, because it's quite easy to collect more and more information, but actually turning the corner and saying, okay, well, given this information, what are we going to do? You need to be quite ruthless. So define the most urgent challenges, and those challenges could be opportunities for you as an organization or for the users, or they could be problems that you need to fix. So sometimes people will come to us saying, well, the prime driver for this project is that the tech needs updating, or there's something that's out of our control that needs changing. That would make it more urgent. How will this work help us achieve our wider goals? So you can see here that we've been answering this across the board already, but what we're going to do here is we're going to synthesize it. Prioritization: which outcome needs addressing first? Where will resources best be spent? What can be tackled now and what can wait? I say should wait, but it's like what can wait. If you come into a project with an idea that actually you're going to tackle the 2 to 3 most important problems at first, that will probably mean that you're going to save money by not trying to tackle 5 or 10 problems at the same time. And then finally, how will we measure the impact of our work, so of this project or of this campaign? And again, are these meaningful metrics, or are they just things that look like, how many clicks are we getting, which might well make us push us into decisions that are not very in line with either our values or the needs of our users. So the way that we typically do this stage is in the form of documenting, either in the form of, say, user personas or user stories, a strategy document. So one of the things we like to say is, like, can we write down, is it possible to say what this campaign is for at this point and how that will work? Can we say what this website is for and how it's supposed to work in achieving that purpose? Success indicators I've mentioned before, but also this is the time when you might be saying, actually, we don't know the solutions yet to these things, but we know that this is a really big problem. We know that replacing the CRM is going to be more expensive than changing the navigation structure on the homepage. So in terms of what you should expect to get at the end of a discovery phase, I mean, I could write lots and lots of outputs, but I have just defined these. So the first thing is success criteria. So that is coming out of that success session that I mentioned. And what that gives you is the buy-in for taking action. So it gives you confidence, but it also gives you buy-in, and it also gives you a basis for what it is that you need to be reporting on after the project is finished. And so you see, we haven't even decided what we're going to build yet, but we know that we need to be measuring these particular metrics. We've agreed about the outcomes. If there's any research that you've done, you want to put that together. We find particularly interesting to stakeholders is the user research or the user testing. So user research is where you're finding out about who your audiences are, what they want, and so on. User testing is using those users or representatives from those groups to actually test what you currently have. And that gives you very clear prioritization of, like, what is the most pressing. But it also means that you've got user empathy. So you're thinking about not yourselves as an organization, but the users at the end as a way of basically, this control mechanism is the phrase I've used, but it's a way of saying, okay, should we do this or this? Well, this one is much more in line with what the users need based on our current understanding. List of priorities, and that is a brief. So going back to what people said at the beginning about what was going not so well with projects, then having a brief that is based on a discovery phase will be a much better brief. And it may well be a brief that is based around questions and problems rather than specification. And this is probably the thing that you are then in a position to talk with an agency on, if it's a website, for example, or talk internally around, and it frees up the next stage by saying, okay, well, we're quite clear about the problems that we've prioritized. Now let's brainstorm and come up with some ideas for different ways of solving those problems. But what we're going to do is we're going to solve the biggest problem first. The theory of change is the next stage, which is the plan for what happens next. Well, what activities are you going to do next? This is not essential, but it's often the most logical next step. So you might end up with maybe half a dozen or a dozen different goals at the end of it, and you might say, well, this is how we're going to go around it. This is the sort of time scale that is going to be reasonable, and if you do the next thing, which is coming up with feasibility, risks, and mitigation, you're much more likely to come up with a reasonable case, a reasonable understanding of how much it's going to cost, and then that is in turn a case for funding. I spoke to my fellow designers, Steph and Ray, about this last week, and they suggested something which was I hadn't thought of before, which is like one of the other outputs is if you go with an agency such as ourselves or any agency really, you get an external perspective on what you've been doing, but you've also got the ability, you've also had the opportunity to collaborate together, so you see how you work, so you're not completely tied to that agency. You can just see how you work together, and then maybe you can take what you've got, those outputs, so there's very clear outputs, and you can go to a different agency. But for clients that we work with repeatedly, what this discovery phase gives us is a shared understanding between the client and ourselves. So one of the difficulties of any project, but particularly one where the specification of the solution is already has already been created, is that we don't necessarily have that understanding until we go through the process. Okay, so to try and finish soon, so there's time for questions or comments from people, but some pointers based on our experience. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is not a pointer so much, but is actually a conceptual framework called the Double Diamond, which I nearly didn't include, but I think it is useful to think about design processes like the ones I'm describing, so discovery and design processes, through some kind of methodological framework. The point I want to highlight about this is that you've got two diamonds, but on the left, you start with a problem. So this is the opportunity, this is the project idea. The idea is that what you do via the three phases or the three activity areas that I mentioned, so interrogating the organization, finding out about your users and testing what you already have, that is what we call diverging. So divergence in this framework is any moment or any phase where you're learning more things or you're creating more things. But as I said before, at some point you need to stop creating and learning. You need to turn the corner and decide. So that's when you synthesize, and that's where the fourth area of definition comes in. And then you end up with a better problem definition. So if you've worked with us recently, you'll know that we've been using statements of work, for example, in order to more clearly articulate what we've learned at the end of a discovery phase. So where it says problem on the left, that is the discovery phase. It then goes on, and this is the doubleness of the double diamond, it goes on to then do the same for solutions. So you diverge in brainstorming and ideating, as they call it, more ideas, and then you have to turn the corner again and say, okay, well, what are we actually going to build? I do find it's useful in discussing this with clients, but also internally. It helps us understand, actually, we should stop now. So pointers for you as people who might run these phases: just be clear in your own mind about what the purpose of the discovery phase is. It's too easy to rely on activities that we do all the time. In fact, we had a project recently where when we reflected on it afterwards, we thought, actually, we learned quite quickly that there was a fundamental problem with the website and its very existence, really, its relationship to its users. But we had already booked in various different audits on it, but instead what we should probably have done is said, actually, we've learned quite a lot, and just by saying there's a fundamental problem here, what would you like us to do with that information? So decide on the activities you'll do at the start, but do be prepared to pivot. Always do the reflection on what does success look like. If there's nothing else you do, that's going to be incredibly valuable, having that conversation internally, clarifying assumptions, unpicking solutions that have crept in. I was thinking about, is it useful to say how much to spend on discovery? I think on any project, you shouldn't spend less than 10% of the entire budget on it. But actually on some projects, such as the War on Want one we mentioned before, it was probably about 70% of the budget went on it, because the changes in the end were relatively small in order to achieve the goals that we'd identified. But we needed to spend all that time on discovery in order to achieve that. And then I've just introduced the concept of divergence. Limit the amount of any of these activities to what you think is actually giving you the right answer. And so this loops back to be sort of trusting yourself. Have you already answered the question? There's a rule of thumb about the number of people, for example, that you need to interview or to test your functionality, and that is 5. Will give you 80% of the knowledge that you have. So you don't need to talk to everybody. Just need to focus on getting good quality information, having enough information. So yeah, this is the sort of mindset I would take in, which is like, are we asking the right questions? And it's just a question of asking yourself that just repeatedly in order to make sure that you're not spending more money on discovery than you need to. What is it that we're actually trying to achieve? And will this activity I'm about to do, will it actually help me find out more, or am I just doing it for the sake of it? Is it time that I rationalize what I have, that I synthesize what I have? Oh, and then this is a minor one, but actually just asking people is not enough. You need to do analysis. You need to actually figure out what people are saying, whether it's accurate or not. Particularly in qualitative interviews, people will often try to please you because they like your organization or something like that. But try and bring a critical eye of actually, will they do what they say they will do? So that's it. That was a very, very rushed tour through discovery phases, but these are the takeaways. And I will share this slide deck with you. But the most important problems are not always obvious at the start. I think that's kind of something that we know based on what you were saying at the start of this this session in the chat. But it's something that we forget at the start of every project. Like the thing that we end up building, the thing that we end up doing may well not be even closely related to what we thought we would do in the first place. A good discovery will save you money. And discovery has 3 areas to explore, so the divergence, and then 1 moment of decision. And the decision is often not what you expected going in, as I said before. The first 3 phases, interrogating the organization, the users, and the existing product, they don't have to be of any particular size, and they don't have to be in any particular order. You can do them all at the same time, but you might well start with the organization. But then at the end, you always need to end up with a definition phase. Okay, that's it.